Up here. There we go. Oh, an error.
Hello.
So, yeah, your site says it didn't. Wait a moment and then try again. So there's
We're,
something's happening
we're,
with your
we're
page.
live.
Oh, yes, we are.
I don't know what you're talking about, by the way.
So when we set up the show, we had set it
Hmm.
up for three sites to broadcast. One was your,
Oh, okay. Right.
yeah,
Okay.
that
Well,
one's not happening right now.
that's okay.
Okay.
Well,
So,
hello, everyone.
oh yes, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time zone you happen to be in. Here we are live.
Live. So,
Yeah.
how was your week, Rick?
Um, in, I was going to say interesting, and I'm trying to reflect on because we were talking just before we got on. We were talking about um, getting things done,
Hmm.
which would actually be an interesting topic in the future. Um, and how we tend to focus on what we haven't accomplished, and we should be focusing more on what we have accomplished. And when I reflect back on our little discussion, there's sort of like, yeah, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of family time, which was I really enjoy. um, we had our little community has what they call the town is called Ladysmith, and they have Ladysmith Days, and so there was lots of
Mm.
activities and things like that. And the highlight is the outdoor concert and fireworks at night. And of course, it's right on the waterfront. It's in a harbor, so fireworks over the water is just
It's
spectacular.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely
We get
spectacular.
that too.
Yeah.
We do have a river.
Yes, yes, you have a
We
very
have a,
famous river.
we have a few rivers.
Yes, 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 yes.
So
And
it does
you're
look
pretty close to the
amazing.
waterfront too, aren't you?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it is really beautiful to see those fireworks on the water.
Yeah. So yeah, no, it went by fast, incredibly fast. What about yourself? How was your week?
Full of
Full,
stuff.
full of stuff.
Full of stuff. Yeah, just work, things falling into place. Yeah, it's been pretty good,
Yeah.
you know.
I am
Um,
going to, this thing's going to come up all the time. So I'm going to remove the one broadcast from your public website.
so I think I know what happened. I just got a warning. I guess I was the one that was supposed to go live on that. We'll figure out this tech stuff. I just
Yeah.
set it to go live. It's so
Okay.
weird. Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll be partial.
Yeah. So for this.
Anyway,
Okay.
I'm feeling pretty excited about today's topic. I feel like it's um, such an important topic.
Oh, yes.
I would say it should be taught in school, right?
Well, you know what? You're absolutely correct. Like
Yeah.
there is nothing. I mean, there's one form of communication, which is writing, right? I mean, that part. But yeah, I mean, effective communication, you don't really get a kind of formal training in that.
We don't.
No.
And it's communication is basically the way that we interact with anyone and everyone in our lives, right?
Well, always. I mean, whether we are, and I forget what the stats were. I think it's something like 5% of it is actually the words that we say, and the rest of it is like there's body language, there's the tone of our voice, all the other components that are involved with communication. And of course, email drives me. Well, text now is the I would say almost the number one, right? And how can you tell if can you read emotions in a text?
No, In fact, I think text messages are probably the worst way to get your point across, have an argument, debate something, make your point. It really, I think text messages have been taken beyond what they're meant to do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because it's just so much faster, and email has been so overused that, like,
yeah.
I personally feel overwhelmed from email. Like, I literally, like, it's just too much, too many emails every day. There's too much
Oh,
information that comes through my emails, and so I really, like, I have to carve time for it, but I really can't get through all of it.
oh,
It's just
I
too much. Yeah. And I'm like, just text me. If you really, really need me, text me. Right.
or
But,
phone me, phone me.
or call. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's actually gone away a long time ago, right? No one wants to talk on the phone anymore.
Well, darn it.
it's it's and I do think that sometimes a conversation over the phone is a lot more effective than going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth via email. But it's almost like we're afraid of picking up the phone and having like a conversation one on one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
um, but the text messaging should really be limited to essential information being sent back and forth, but it's being used for all sorts of things. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I've had plenty of debates over
Yeah.
text message, and there's no way to know how the person meant it, what the person's doing. I mean, sometimes I'm like literally doing three or four things at the same time, and like I send that quick text, and then there's autocorrect that gets in the mix that complicates things, right? And then you read it back after a while, it's like, oh no, that's not really what I meant,
Oh,
like
yeah,
that was
yeah, yeah,
autocorrect, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say that that's really the topic of our conversation today, but that is a way that we communicate,
Well,
right?
but
That
it
is
is,
a way that we
yeah.
communicate.
I mean, if you want to be effective, you have to be aware of, certain things. And I think like one of my pet peeves around texting, because it's so prevalent now, is that there's a for me there's an expectation that when somebody texts me, they're going to stay there and listen to my response.
Mm, yeah,
So I'll get a text which is a question, and I like to be very responsive, like, and that may be a boundary I need to look at. Okay,
yeah.
how responsive should I be, or need to be, right? So, but I like to be responsive, and people have actually made comments. Wow, you're always, responsive. And I said, well, if I've got the moment, right, it's a short text, right? Boom. Um, but then it's like um, birds singing in the background. Like, okay, so I just texted you. now, now I'm waiting now. It's like, where did you?
I can totally be guilty of that because I may be texting and then I got my kids coming around wanting something, and then now I forgot all about that text message, and then 10 minutes later I'm like, wait, I was in the middle of a
You were middle.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. When you're text messaging someone, you don't know what they're doing, right?
No.
And sometimes we make meaning of that, right? Oh, the
Well,
person didn't respond to me,
Well,
or
and
like,
that's the funny thing about, like, when you're talking about communication again, right? In the absence of any information, that other party is going to make it up, right? So
meaning that.
we're always making up stories. So it's sort of like,
Mhm.
okay, did they drive off this side of the road? Are they just mad at me now and not talking to me? Right? All these different things.
Or eventually you gather enough information about the person you're texting with and you
Yeah.
realize, that person is just a slow texter, right?
Oh, the slow texter.
Or like that person may be responsive and engaging for a little while and then they drop out until the next day. I do have friends that are like that. I know I text them, I may receive a response the next day, right?
Yeah,
Unless it's something that needs an immediate response.
yeah,
But overall, effective communication is getting your point across in a way that's being received in the way you mean it, right? And with purpose, right?
yes,
And that's like, aside from the text conversation, like in a regular conversation with anyone, whether it is at work or with a loved one or with a friend or with your children, right? There's so much that gets lost in the way we interpret, the way we filter things through our own filter, right?
Our own
Um,
filters. Yep.
our own filter. And one way that I really realized how much of that I was doing was a few years ago when I started seeing a couples therapist with my husband.
Hmm.
And one exercise that she had us do was, okay, from here on, when you guys communicate and talk, you're going to sit down and it's going to feel a little bit funny, but you're going to sit down. The person that needs to say something will say what she or he has to say. And
Yeah.
then the other person has to be completely silent and then repeat back what if so if he was talking to me, I would have to be silent and repeat back what I heard him say,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So in this part of me repeating back what I heard him say, there was always like, no, 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 wait, that's not exactly what I said, right? So then he would repeat what he said, right? And then I would have to repeat again if I understood it the way he meant it.
Right.
And it was a really good way for us to realize that there was so much that we were misinterpreting about each other's, what the other person was saying in the conversation, that was part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
That was a very big part of how a lot of the, like resentment or anger or like, misinterpretation was happening, right? Like he was seeing things in a way and I was like, no, that's not how I meant it. And I think that's very true for all of us, right? Unless you're super intentional about it, unless you're very, very aware, that there's a tendency for that to happen, right? Now, in coaching, we do that through reflecting back, right? When someone shares with us their challenge or what they're going through or a story, we
Hmm.
always reflect back because it serves a couple of different purposes, right? One of them is to check in with the person to make sure that we're getting the story right.
Yes.
And the reason is exactly that, right?
Yeah.
To just make sure that I'm not filtering what you're saying through my own filter,
Yeah.
right? So that's always a really good way to start a conversation. Make sure that you're understanding what a person is saying, right? And make sure that they understand that you understood, right? And in the
Hmm.
same, it should be reciprocal, right? It should be reciprocal when the other person then hears you respond back. I mean, yes, it's not going to be as quick as like having a at first it's going to feel forced, right? At first it's going to feel like not natural.
Well, yeah, because I mean, we don't, we don't tend to do that in everyday conversations, right? Like
No.
if your spouse says, let's watch Jeopardy tonight. Um, can I can I just get some clarification on that? Did I hear you
Hmm.
properly? Did you want to watch Jeopardy tonight? We don't do that, right?
No,
You know,
we don't.
we don't practice that. I mean, but I mean, you come up with a really good point about the importance of listening in communication, right? Because there's different levels of communication. There's communicate or listening to understand, right? There's listening to yeah, but in other words, you're looking to respond to what you're hearing. So in other words, almost like in a debate situation, right? So we got to be really, really careful who we are in the moment when we're listening. And I think we talk about our filters. When I was teaching effective communication, we talked about preferences and
Hmm.
being prisoners to our preferences because we all have a habitual way of how we like to be communicated to.
Hmm.
Some people like to be very, direct. They like people that are direct. They don't like wishy-washy speaking, or they don't want to know about your weekend or how things were. Right? Let's just get to the point here. Right? Right? And I'm not saying present company is. I mean, we had this conversation in the beginning,
Hmm.
but and then there are people like want that time. They want to be heard in a way, right? So if I'm stuck on my preference of, come on, let's get it done, I can't waste time here, they're going to speak to me in their preference way, right?
Hmm.
So a lot for me, when I was doing those workshops was to point out to people what their preferences were. So the more they understood what their preferences were, they could see the other preferences in others, and then they
Mm-hmm.
could adapt themselves to the other person, right? So it wasn't about expecting people to talk to me in a way I wanted to be talked to. It was me adjusting my communication, because if I wanted to be effective, um, you know, that was important, right? And I remember a couple of examples in some really crucial areas. Well, in uh, when I was a paramedic supervisor, was um, there was one person kept coming back to me who had to engage with another person, and was getting very frustrated that he wasn't getting his communications out. Like, he said, this guy's not understanding me. And I said, well, what's he doing? He says, all he does is ask questions. Well, maybe, just maybe, you're not giving enough details. Right? It's like, if it's bing, bang, boom, right? Well, this guy needs to know what's in between bing, bang, boom before he can make a proper decision, because that's his preference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you too could just, it's like, get frustrated or understand that this person needs more details. And I do this in sales training too, where, I have a client that's in sales, and we've been talking about how to interact with people that are buying things in your product, is to really listen to what their preferences are for information. How do they make decisions? Do they need details? Do they like pictures? Are they right to the point, right? Or do they like to discuss and collaborate, right? So it's
So
really seeing that as a one. So,
so you're making a couple really, 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 really good points, right?
oh,
Because I
good.
think, yeah, because I think when we think of communication, we immediately think about how we're going to say something. But the first part of communication is listening,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Do we know how to listen? And I realized when I became a coach that I didn't know how to listen. And when you don't know how to listen, what happens is you're half listening and half formulating what you're going to respond, half formulating, making a judgment on what the person is saying, right?
Yeah.
So as your brain is formulating a response, or like trying to hold on to that thought, or like perhaps even interrupting the other person, you're not really being present or listening to what the person is truly saying, right? Another thing that happens when you force yourself to keep that silence and really listen to the person is that now you're opening yourself up to other parts of the communication that may not be verbal, right?
Mm,
Because
mm-hmm.
in sitting in silence and listening to what the person is saying, now you're noticing more things like body language, right?
Yeah.
The energy that that the conversation has, right? Connecting with the person, with what the person is truly saying, right? So I think that's actually a very key part that we don't necessarily make a connection to when we think about effective communication. That yes, you really need to be not only learn how to listen, but
Mm-hmm.
also to hold your judgment of what's being said, right? And the other thing that we do, like in the example that you gave, is we just think that people are mind readers, right? So we just assume, right? We just assume that people understand our point of view, or assume that people get us,
Yes,
that
the
they
get is
have,
an important one.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right? And it's like, no, they don't, right? Like, so we leave out details, right? I don't know if it's out of wanting to get that across quicker or what it is, but like we leave out details, right?
It's
We're
a
not
privilege.
very thorough. Yeah,
No,
we're
it's
not
a
very
privilege.
thorough.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So that's the other part, right? We're not, and then there are the parts that we don't communicate because guess what? We're afraid of what the person may think. We
Totally.
don't know how to get that across.
Yeah,
We don't want to be judged. We
yeah.
don't want to, make the other person
Great
angry.
conflict. Right.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So there's discomfort in communicating what we want to communicate.
Yeah.
Right. And so that creates misunderstandings, creates like holes in the story, creates like a lack of communication, frankly, right? Like partial communication that's being done, that now the person understands it in a completely different way than it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're not giving all the details. So
And
that's some part of it,
oh,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. And what you're pointing towards is the way our preferences get in the way, right? So if you're, and this is, if you're ever study enneagrams or personal profiling, the the introverted feeler or the extroverted feeler, right? There, it's all about, you know, their feelings, kind of a thing, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
introverted feeler doesn't like conflict, so will not be bold and direct to
Mm-hmm.
somebody that wants to be heard by bold and direct, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that other, so it's on the opposite side of the wheel. So any frictions, like Carl Jung says, any frictions are going to come from the your opposite type, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if I like, if I like, to warm up a conversation and sort of like, it's like, how was your weekend, or let me tell you about my weekend and what I did, kind of a thing, and then get to to the real point, right? If I'm speaking to a peer that, look, just I want to get to the point. Well, he's not going to be listening because all he's hearing is la 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 la, la, right? He's
Yeah.
not hearing any of the anything important, right? And it's the same with the other side. We could, so any overused strength can be a weakness, and that's why it's important to really know what preferences you have for communication, because
Mm-hmm.
there are people out there that do like details, and they will, okay, this is just a judgment one, they will almost bore you to death with details, right? It's like okay, like, and especially in sales, like, there are people that want the details. They want to know how many miles per gallon it takes and all these other kind of stuff, right? That's great. There are some that don't. I just want to know
Mm-hmm.
what it feels like to sit in the steering wheel. It's so they're
Mm-hmm.
very more picture oriented.
Feeling oriented.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
I mean, the other thing about communication that this is the part that I think really should be taught in school is
Yeah.
how to communicate
Hmm.
effectively. Right
Yeah.
now, you're having a conversation. Let's say that yes, you have decided you're gonna say this thing, and let's say that it's a little bit of a conflict too. What do? We are in the convincing game, we're in the blaming game, we're in the accusing game, right?
Yeah.
And what we do is like we start saying, you did this, you did that, because of you, this, right? And with that, I don't want to say that you never have a point to go and have a conversation with someone, but if the aim is to resolve a conflict, the moment that you're pointing the finger, the moment that you're blaming and accusing and like coming across like that, strongly like that, what the other party does is this, right?
Getting
Shuts
defensive.
off,
Oh yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
now they're no longer actually having a conversation with you. Now they're rehearsing in their heads how to defend themselves, how to respond to you pointing the finger, right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you can get the same exact points across without pointing any fingers, right? You can get the same exact concept across without doing that. And how do you do that? By just talking about what you know, talking about you, right?
Yeah.
I feel this way when, you know, when I'm being yelled at, right? Hey, Rick, when I'm being yelled at, it really, really triggers me. It's something that does not allow me to listen or have an effective
Yeah.
conversation with you.
Yeah.
Rick, you're yelling at me and you're making me not even listen to you. I mean, it's completely different, right? Like it comes across completely different because I
Oh yeah.
am taking responsibility for the way I feel
How you're
about it,
experiencing it.
right? But I'm
Absolutely.
still telling you, I don't freaking like it when you yell at me,
Yeah.
right? I'm just not saying it in a blamey, accusatory way.
Yeah.
So the person is now actually hearing what I'm saying. Now the person can kind of enter into my world a little bit, right? Get a little glimpse of my point of view. Because that's always a factor, right? It's like point of view against point of view. We have different points of view, different maps of the world, and we are
Oh yeah.
expecting to that the other person is going to see it exactly the way we do.
Just like
We
that. Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
right? But
No.
all that we can do is to give the other person a glimpse into our world or how it feels for us. Guess what? When I talk to you about how I feel, there's no way you can debate how I feel. It's how I feel, right? But when I say to you, you're always yelling at me, right? You can say, no, that's not true. I don't feel that I always yell at you, right? And then
Because
we,
you don't listen.
because you don't listen, exactly. Then your comeback is
Yeah.
finding something that I did that caused you to do this, right? So we're both victims and, in a game of defending ourselves, right?
Well,
We have our shields up.
two egos arguing,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And if you want to
Absolutely.
have a soul to soul conversation, you have to drop the egos, right? If you really truly want to understand the other person, then you have to drop the egos. You can't do that, um, like you said, right? So it does become right. So right away it's sort of like, oh, well, that wasn't my intention, So it's more, and then all of a sudden now I'm reflecting back, right? So my defenses are up. Now there's another thing that comes into mind as is judgment. So it's seeking understanding without judgment,
Hmm.
because it's so easy. Like even just your little art, we were play acting, by the way, if anybody understands that. Um, but
Rick never yells at me. Just FYI, everyone. He's not a screamer. If anything, it would be me yelling.
the
I've,
Italian,
never, I've never yelled at Rick either.
no, no. but but it's sort of like, like when you say, well, I feel like, right? So when somebody does that, right, there is a little bit of ego that still lingers there that wants to judge that too. You
Hmm.
have to be aware of that and let that go, right? Well, you're too sensitive, right? Again, pointing back towards the other individual. So when you hear it, just notice it, right? You don't have to act or speak on every thought that comes in your head. Fine, have the thought, right? So judgment is really important in taking it away from any meaningful conversation.
Hmm. But also when you say like when I'm being yelled at, I close off. Let's say, right?
Yeah,
I'm not saying when I'm being yelled at by you. I'm saying when I'm being yelled at in general,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that removes even more pressure,
yeah.
right? It's like that is something in general that really triggers me. That is something in general that makes me really uncomfortable,
Well,
right?
it's part of a preference, right? So again, going sort of looking at the behavioral, right? These are our preferences are taught to us. Like we learn them as we grow up. This is how we feel that we need to identify with the world, how we need to interact with the world, right? So when you have an introverted feeler who, when anytime they hear loud speaking, the first thing that they think of is it's an argument, right? So
Yeah.
again, that's my filter, right? It may
Hmm.
not even be, right?
Hmm.
It just could be a loud talker, right? And there are
Yeah.
loud talkers out there, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the whisperer. There's like
I mean that actually reminds me of some of the greatest misunderstandings that I used to have with my ex. Is like you were yelling at me. I'm like, no, I was not. I was just making a point, being passionate about it. That's just
well,
how I am, right? And
and
like
that's the filter. That's
we
the filter,
had we
right?
had a different threshold
Yeah,
of what yelling was,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like anything to him in my the way I perceived it, anything that I said was yelling, right? And he perceived me as yelling at him anything that I
Yeah,
said, and like
yeah.
that was not at all my intention, right?
And
And not at all the way others perceived it, but that was the way he perceived it. So
yeah,
we also have a different threshold for things, right?
100%, 100%. And again, this is all about understanding, right? What's going on, right?
Yeah.
If you use that only as a tool, like there's nothing wrong with us. This is how we kind of work, right? The more you're in tune with that, you can check in on yourself, right? Because if all of a sudden, like you said, if somebody's yelling at you, or the perception is that they're yelling at you, right,
Mm-hmm.
and you're starting to feel uncomfortable about that, check in with yourself. Is it true that they are angry? Is it true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because it could be just your perception, it could be your preferences clouding the clarity of what's really going on. Yeah, there are some people that are really overexcited and various other things, right? Um, but it's if there's anything that's ever going to go wrong, it really comes down to the number one is communication,
Absolutely.
right? How many times have you heard um, they don't listen to me,
Mm-hmm.
or I can't seem to get my point across? Um,
Mm-hmm.
all these different things, right? It all points to, or the lack of, right? I got no communication. What do you mean you
Yeah.
got no communication? There was 10 emails.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah, we're filtering things through our own filter at all times. I mean, that's absolutely true 100% of the time, right?
always.
And,
Our
and
world
the
is,
other the other thing that I think is really important to understand is when to communicate, especially if you have feelings about it, right? Especially if you're like angry or,
oh,
triggered
ooh,
or, right? It's picking the right time in the right setting, right? Because sometimes we feel angry and want to just immediately go and like,
never.
head on and confront the person and let it out and solve it, right? And that's exactly what we're doing. We're in survival. We're like, we're in that like defensive mode that is only going to create the same exact thing on the other side, right? Because
Absolutely.
energy responds to equal energy, right?
Absolutely. The law of
And the setting is important too. Is this the right and appropriate time or place to have this conversation,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So if you have really strong feelings about it and you feel particularly charged by something, chances are this is not a really good time to go have that conversation, right? Calm down first, let it process, simmer in it for a minute, like
Yeah.
have the
Let
conversation
us
with the
let
empty
it
chair.
settle.
I
Let it
swear I'm going to
settle.
bring my empty chair one of these days over
You
here.
bring your empty chair.
Have the conversation with the empty chair, rehearse the conversation, give it a few hours, give it a day or two. That is very subjective how long you need.
Oh yeah.
But don't do it when you're charged. Just
Yeah.
don't,
Well,
because
I
it's
mean,
not going to be constructive.
well, I mean, okay. So I'm assuming that people that are watching our show have been around, have lived a few days, right? And have interacted with a few people, right? So
Yeah.
I am almost certain that we all have examples in our life when we have been in a low mood or a crappy mood or whatever kind of mood, but a low mood, right? Because in a happy mood, we never seem to have problems with communication. Like we just go with the flow. But when we're in a low state, angry state, whatever state it is, how many good conversations have you actually had? How many good decisions have you actually made? Right? So there's something to do with understanding where you are in the feelings, right?
Hmm.
And you're absolutely correct. When you are supercharged, that is never a good time to because all you're doing now is you're just gonna go straight to the ego anyways.
Well, you are in that survival mode. So
Absolutely,
your
fight or flight.
focus
Yeah,
is narrowed on the thing that's
yeah,
triggering you.
yeah,
So that's all you see. You
yeah.
don't see any other possibilities. You don't see the other
No
person's
clarity.
perspective,
Yeah,
right? You're making meaning of anything and everything leads to the reason why you're angry.
yeah,
So there is really no conversation to be had because there's only one conversation, which is your anger that
yeah,
needs to be released.
yeah,
That basically that conversation becomes a way for you to emotionally release.
yeah,
That's kind of
yeah,
how emotional release
yeah,
works, right? You just let it all out. You just puke it all out. Like say it
yeah.
however you want it, right? Do it with the empty chair. Don't do it if you're trying to resolve conflict with someone, right? Because it is going to turn into actual conflict, right? It's going to
Well,
be that
exactly.
back and forth that's not going to take you anywhere.
Never good consequences have ever come up in my own personal experience, right?
Never.
And it took a few hard lessons to learn that, right? And
Oh,
now,
yeah.
but the more you practice, like, okay, this is not a good time, right? Then it's not a good time, right? sorry, I can't talk with you right now, right? It's like,
Yeah. Write
we'll
it
see what happens.
down. Talk to
Yeah,
the chair,
yeah.
record yourself, have
Go
a
for a walk.
conversation in the car, listen to really loud music and move, go to the gym, right? Let the anger move out of you so that now you can think about it with a clear head, right? And
Yes.
have an actual constructive conversation.
Yeah.
If the aim is to resolve conflict or have, get something out of the conversation. If
Well,
it's
even
just
even
about
chances well, even chances are that whatever it was that was happening in the moment naturally disappears.
oftentimes, right? Oftentimes.
Yeah.
And yes, it is also about going into the conversation and being open, not only to accept that there's a different point of view than yours. Yours
Yeah.
is not the only point of view that there is, right? And also be open to feedback. Be open to feedback. Be open to receive what the other person may be sharing with you, right? Take some ownership and really deeply listen to what the person has to say, because the same way that you have feelings about things the other person does too, right? So really
Yeah.
it's about entering the other person's world, right? Like being an observer in that moment and really trying to connect and have empathy and understanding for a different
Seek
point of view than yours,
seek first
right?
to understand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, getting back to, be as neutral as possible, right? Take judgment out of it, right? Because it is their point of view. It's not you're it's not how you think they should act, right? They're
And also like go in it with the intention of expressing how this feels for you. So not like I'm here to change your mind, I'm here to show you how it is, none of that is going to be received well, right? I'm just sharing how this feels. And oftentimes just sharing it in a way that is the other person is able to receive it, so non-accusatory way, the point is made, right? The mind is changed, right? When the other person sees and hears how this feels for you or how uncomfortable you may have been, you don't need to say more than that, right?
well. I was just thinking, while you were saying that, and I apologize for not totally listening.
Modeling, Greg, you got to model
Modeling,
here.
modeling. No, but something occurred to me while you sparked, like in coaching conversations, right? We ask permission,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I thought, like what you say is, like say the argument kind of a thing, right? And you say, well, when I hear this, this is how I feel, and all this other kind of stuff, right? You know, there's a lot of power in asking permission to speak in a certain way, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I know a lot of times, like I'm not a very bold or direct individual, right? I speak a lot in metaphors and pictures and things like that. But there's the odd time where I feel I need to be really direct and just
Mm-hmm.
point, right? And knowing that other person, right, who has a preference of not having people, right, you need permission. So it's sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
can I be direct with you? Can I be, Frank or Rick or Tom, whatever? But
Or even, do you mind if I'm just going to be straightforward,
well,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
The minute you say that, they back off in a way of, oh, okay, I don't have to have my defenses up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will give you permission, right? So there,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, the conversation just opens right up again, right? You know, so so there's something to be said about having, even taking or adopting coach-like conversations, right?
I
Because what,
mean, a
oh,
lot of this is
yeah,
how we learn to coach, right?
yeah,
We're giving out all our secrets. That's how we learn to coach, right? It's deep listening, is not making judgments, right? It's
yeah,
entering the other person's world, it's reflecting back, right? And like one that we haven't mentioned, but not
yeah.
less important, is expectations, right?
Mm,
Drop all expectations, make agreements instead, right?
mhm.
Don't expect people that they do things or say things the way you expect them to.
They do,
Make an
yeah,
agreement
yeah,
instead. I
Yeah.
would really like it if, we could make a point to talk more often, or I would really love it if every other day you wash the dishes,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And already, if you shift your mind from expectations to agreements, that's going to avoid you a lot of uncomfortable conversations, right?
Yeah.
It's all a part of communication, right? Because oftentimes it's really what the source of the conflict is that needs to be kind of addressed, right?
Hmm.
Why are we even having these conversations when we could solve it from the get-go
Yeah.
by making very clear what we expect? This is what or what you need. This is what I
Yeah.
need. Is that something that you can do for me? Is that
Yeah.
something that works for you? Instead of, I expect my husband to do this, this, and this, and he never does, as usual, right? It's
Well,
like
hey, wait a minute.
he never washes the dishes, or he never walks the dog out, or whatever it is, right? He never picks up the groceries. How about, did you have the conversation? He should know. He should know, right? He doesn't. Truth is, if he doesn't do it, is because he doesn't think that he needs to, right? So drop all expectations, because expectations come from your map of the world. Expectations come from how you perceive things, right?
Absolutely.
From your own feelings,
Yeah.
from your own way of seeing things.
Yeah.
So drop expectations, share how you feel and what you would like to see happen or be said or be done. And you give the other person the opportunity to now agree to it or share their point of view,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're right, Don.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's
Nobody.
not a
Nobody.
mind reader, Don.
But you know, it's funny. We're not. We know we're not mind readers, but boy, can we make up stories, right? About other people, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah. Constantly. We're constantly
constantly,
making meaning, constantly. The,
constantly,
the world revolves around us. Everything that somebody else does has to do with us. They're avoiding us.
and
No, I was actually almost got into a car accident because I'm trying to text you while I'm driving, right? It's like you don't know what the other person is doing in that moment. You don't know, what's going through their heads, or, what kind of day they had, right? Chances are it's not about you, right? Flash news, it's not about
never
you
about you.
oftentimes,
It's
right?
never
And
about
if it is, then let's talk about it in a way that is constructive versus accusatory. It doesn't take you anywhere, right? It
you.
doesn't take you anywhere. Oftentimes, either the other person is a people pleaser or wants to avoid conflict, so they say yes, 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 and the situation happens again, right? So just really creating, to me, like the most important part is to create a space, a safe space where both people can participate and feel safe in the conversation and not being accused or blamed or the
Yeah.
cause of the conflict, right? So I know you had brought up what Don wrote here. Let me see if I can do it. Um, your mom chimes in and says you should not feel that way because so she denies your feelings. I mean, I'm not sure what part of the conversation you posted this, but that's kind of her that's kind of
Her filter.
her thing, right? That's how she makes sense of the world. That's how she shows up. That's how she is wired. It's the program that she's running, right? And so I find, and it's really interesting that you wrote this because that's something I experienced a lot in my childhood, and it used to be a huge trigger for me, a huge trigger.
Hmm.
Um, it's really about not trying to get the other person not to do that, but it's about reaffirming for yourself that sense of, that validity, right? My story is valid, my feelings are valid, and regardless of her denying it or, having sympathy or empathy for it, right? It's really about, again, accepting the fact that you can't really make people do something different than what they do, but you can respond to it differently, right? And that is hard, right? All of this can be really hard at the beginning. It can feel a little funny too, right? I
Hmm.
shared at the beginning that, and that's all that you can do, right? Hey, mom, when you deny what I just said, it makes, or like when I share something and what I shared is being denied, it makes me feel this way, right? So that's all that you can do. She may or may not receive that, right? And then there's work for you to do in terms of not feeling emotionally triggered by that. That's all that you can do, right? There's not much more than that you could do. But, like knowing how to respond in this way versus saying, as usual, you're denying what I'm saying, or getting
Yeah,
mad and
exactly.
triggered, right?
Yeah.
So it takes a little bit of rehearsing that, right? Like I shared at the beginning how like the therapist had us do this exercise and we both felt really funny about it, right? So first of all, if you're in a relationship and you bring on board the other person to do that with you, right? You're in it together, you're working on it or towards the same goal. I realized that even if we were not doing it properly, it kind of removed the pressure of what the argument was, right? Because now we're laughing at each other because we're speaking to each other in a way that wasn't familiar, right?
Hmm.
But the only way to make that familiar is by doing it, by practicing it, rehearsing it, and then eventually it becomes the way you talk, and it will no longer feel funny, right? You will like, you will get better at it, right? You will say it in a more fluid way. So really it's about connecting to the other person, seeing their point of view, deeply listening, right? And really rehearsing, expressing your own feelings from just your point of view, from like sticking to your truth and to your own feelings without pointing fingers, right? And that
Well,
takes a
yeah.
little bit of practice. It takes a little bit of doing it a few times before it becomes how you talk, right? How you communicate.
And I
So
think the the one thing out of that kind of conversation that I've learned is not to take it personally, because it's not a personal comment. It's a, like you pointed out, it's from her point of view. It's her habitual thinking. It's her unclear
program,
programming.
yeah,
It's
it's
her
her
program,
program. Yeah.
right? And really, when you take stop being personal about it, it's amazing. Then you start to see, oh, I see that program running in there. I see what's going
You
on.
start noticing it in them.
Right.
Yes.
And they're innocently doing that. Because, maybe there might be,
They,
exceptions out there, but most of the time people don't understand what they're doing.
they don't realize it.
No.
Yes. And it's, like another way to reframe it is to really see, okay, I get it, right? She's just running a program. She's very unconscious about it, right?
Mhm.
It's wrong what she's doing, right? Because it's my reality. She doesn't really have the right to deny it, right? But it can be an opportunity to say, if I'm really triggered, what part of me is being triggered by this, right? What is it that I can look at, right? So you can just express to her, right? When this is done, this is how it makes me feel, right? And then really have empathy for her for not being able to show up any differently, right? If she could show up differently, she would, right? And chances are, if she's doing this and it's a program, the program got installed by modeling because that was done to her,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So,
So, um, so one of the tools I mentioned earlier about enneagrams and personal profiling. So one of the tools that provides a hint towards the kind of communications preferences you have and what you prefer, and how you want to be communicated to, is doing those profiles. And there's lots of them out there. I usually go to 16personalities.com, and they have also enneagrams and various other things. But in there are sections about communication, right?
mhm,
And they're basically, I I break it down to four basic types, because that's, Young had the introverted, extroverted, thinker, feeler, right? So you have four quadrants, right? So the introverted thinker is a very detail oriented person. So they like to have details. They want to know the what's in between that, right? So when they like things in writing, right?
mhm,
So they want, give me a list, give me my activities, right? So that's the introverted thinker. The opposite, the not quite the opposite, but on the same side is the extroverted thinker. Now that's the guy that wants to be direct. He wants just stick to the facts, you know, and then, let me decide. So they're always focused on the results, right? So they want to know, okay, what's the bottom line, right? How much is it going to cost me? Period,
Mm.
right? And so then on the opposite side, you have the feelers, right? So the introverted feeler is the one that likes things more relaxed, is more collaborative, supportive, things like that, right? They're very patient. And then the extroverted feeler is is the one that's kind of friendly all the time, right? Is always involved, always looking, oh, there's a group of people over there in that corner of that party. I got to see what they're up to, right? So they're always involved in various things. So if if you're communicating with these opposite types, particularly the opposite types, because that's where the frictions come in, right? So if you got somebody that's all over the place, right, and likes friendly banter and word pictures and things like that. If I'm a detailed oriented person, and if I speak in details, I'm going to bore the heck out of that person,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Now I know we're going to be doing another show on labels, but if I what we need to understand is just because when you do a test like a behavior test and it comes up, well, I'm an introverted thinker, therefore, that's not necessarily true. You have a preference for details, but that doesn't mean that you can't be more open, more friendly, more, right? And so on the other side, understanding that opposite type can look at it, just because you're detailed oriented doesn't mean you're stuffy either, or sometimes they're snobbish or something. They come across that way, right? So the more you understand yourself, and that's why I like actually to sometimes bring behavioral profiles into a coaching conversation, because it just points to preferences, but they only describe you. They
Hmm.
don't define you.
Yeah, it can also change over time.
Well, that's the part. Like if you
Yeah.
define
Yeah.
them, then you're sort of saying, "Well, I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do about it. This
You
is
have
this is
you have
me.
created the
Don't
program.
like me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But we're not built that way, right? So the more we can relax and respond accordingly. Oh, okay. He wants it direct. Okay, here it is. I'm leaving Friday, right?
Yeah, it's about understanding each other's like language, right?
Absolutely.
Preferred language, which sometimes for some people is not verbal,
No,
right? Because we
no.
talked a lot about, like conflict and having a conversation and how, like to get your point across. But sometimes it's just not verbal, right? And sometimes it's not a direct conversation, right? Especially if it's like, in a work setting or like in more of a social setting. Like I find what I call plant seeds. Like my friends by now know that I'm just planting seeds, right?
Hmm, hmm.
It's, there's a way to get your point across without really making it about anyone, but like with curiosity, right? I wonder, if things were this way, what would happen? Like I bet that, it will be received this way or whatever, right? So even when you're trying to communicate in a group setting, like really coming from a more humble place where you're not just making declarations and speaking like absolutes, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
like teaching people or telling people what to do, right? Just kind of a wonder, or like speaking of from your experience, when I tried to do it this way, turned out, not to work really well. But then I shifted and I tried this and it really worked well. You might want to try it,
Yeah.
right? So that's different than saying you should go to the gym 5 times a week and don't eat anything, like starve yourself for whatever. I'm just like coming up with like bad examples, but like a lot of us are in the business of like you should do this and you should do that, and he completely, I was actually observing a dynamic like this weekend with some friends where it was a conversation about relationships, right? And I knew both people, and one was sharing that she was, having a rocky moment in her relationship, and the other one is super like, marriage for like 20, 30 years, right? And you should do this, you should fight for it, you should do that. And it's like, you didn't listen to anything that she just said,
Yeah.
right? You're getting into the shoulds and woulds and like need to, right? Because you're speaking from your view of the world, right?
Yeah.
And what you're missing when you do that, you're missing all the nuances and the details and the things that created that situation for that person that
Well,
that,
and
that
we tend
relationship is
to
made of.
we
Yeah.
yeah, we tend when we're not practicing what we preach, we tend to go straight to solution, right?
Based on what the solution will be for us,
Absolutely.
right? Based
Absolutely.
on what worked for us, based on, so, but when I say the same thing, right? In my relationship, and this is not my specific example, but I'm just, want to give an example. So
Just
when I
a,
had a rocky moment in my relationship, what really worked for me was to really go and see someone together and really work at it. That's
yeah.
very different than saying, you should go see a therapist. You should go see a therapist. You need to do that right away, right? That's very different, right? Because I'm just sharing with you what has worked for me for what my situation was, and that's going to be received completely different. So yes, it doesn't, all of this doesn't apply just to conflict, right, or to a relationship with your partner, but it's in social settings, in work settings. Like, always come from a place of curiosity. I think the word I wonder is one of the most powerful words. Like, whenever I want to slip something in there, I'm like, I wonder if we thought about it this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm
Right?
just curious. I'm just
I'm
curious.
just curious. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Because curiosity is received as that. I'm just curious because I don't know any different. So I'm trying to enter your world, right? I'm curious to know more. Tell me more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas advising and like telling comes across as you're invading my space. You're telling me what to do, and I don't want you to tell me what to do.
And you're
It's,
and you're not speaking again at the soul level. You're speaking at an ego level, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
two egos can never agree to anything because they're developed through different points of view, right? So it's
Absolutely.
always like Stephen Covey says in his book Seven Habits is seek first to understand, right? Right? Get the other person's point of view. Get down to the whatever level it is, right? So yeah, there's a lot. It's a huge topic, right? I mean,
There's so much that
my
could be
my
said.
communication workshop is a day long, right?
Mm,
So because part of that is to immerse yourself in the other people, right?
yeah.
So we have an exercise. It's much similar to yours where we put people, we call it knee to knee, right? And we say, okay, just using one of the preferences, say details, right? I want you to sell your car, right?
Mm,
And so the other person listens to it. And so all they can do is just give details, 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 right? And
hmm
then they ask, okay, so how is that received? Well, if you're detailed oriented, people enjoyed it. If you're if you're not, you're looking out the window. You're like you're
hmm
distracted immediately because you
hmm
got bored quickly, right? So it's really really helpful to really get clear about what your preference is because anytime your preference is not met, there's friction that comes with it.
Yeah,
So there's always a
absolutely.
feeling. And when you're in touch with the feeling, then oh, something's up. And that's your
Yeah.
signal not to attack or change, right? Right?
Get curious,
Get
right? Get
curious.
curious.
Yes,
And
get
also
curious.
understand when something is bluntly wrong, right? Like someone denying what you just shared, right? Denying your reality. Always remind yourself hurt people, right?
Yeah.
Come from hurt, right?
Yeah.
So if they're doing that to you, it's because it's being done to them, right?
There's
Uh,
this there's a thing behind it. There's a thing behind it.
Absolutely. And there's, and this is where I know we're like out of time by now, but like, another thing that I learned in NLP actually is speaking of like language, people being like visual or auditory or kinesthetic, like how to speak, use words that reflect that, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm a visual person, I would speak to you and say, I see what you're saying, right? Or if you're auditory and I realize that you're auditory, I would say, I hear you,
Yeah.
right? So language also can be very, very powerful. I mean, here we're talking about much more, like these are like obviously skills that we use as coaches, right? It's a little more in depth, but that's also part of it too, really understanding, especially if you're in a relationship with someone,
Well,
right?
totally.
What
And part of that is like again, like when you really read more about so personal behaviors are really just behaviors that are habits, right? They're just something
Mhm.
that's picked up, right? So and again, it only describes you, but language plays an important part in identifying that, right? So you have a lot of people who say, well, I feel this, I feel this, I feel this, right?
And that's
I,
kinesthetic, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, I think, I think, right? So
Hmm.
you kind of know where they are, right? It doesn't mean that they're bad or wrong or indifferent. It's just that's just their preference. What Jung said in his teachings is when you're stuck on a preference, you and don't want to move, when you become that prisoner, then communication really starts to break down.
Hmm. Yeah.
So again, it's really a part knowing that yeah, yes, not everybody sees the world the same way as you do. Don't take it personal. You can adapt your communications to be more effective. You don't have to stick with one style. You can adapt it. As a matter of fact, if you need to do that in presentations, right? You should know that to do that in any communication, right? Do I have enough details? Do I have my deadlines put in place, right? Have I talked to everybody about, so those are things that where you can encompass all the preferences in your communication.
Hmm.
And if people are coming back with questions or they want more whatever, then you know you haven't quite met it yet.
Hmm.
Yeah. So help what part of you need to know more about, right? So anyways,
Very,
I
very
love
big
it.
topic.
Yeah, it's a
Very
big
big
topic.
topic. But I would say really start there. Always talk about me, how I
Yeah.
feel this way when, right? Never say, use the word you, throw it away. Um, always, always repeat back what you heard the person say. It gives you an opportunity to check in and make sure that you're hearing things properly, right?
Yeah.
Agreements instead
Agreements
of
again. Yeah.
expectations,
Yeah.
right? And getting into the other person's, point of view,
Yeah.
right?
Help me understand.
With
Yeah.
compassion and
Why
being
is this
curious.
important to you?
Be
And
curious.
yeah, because
Yeah. I
yeah,
wonder.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
I'm
it's nice.
curious.
I'm curious. I'm
I'm
curious.
curious, Rick. How do you feel about the fact that's 5:02 and we went 2 minutes over?
Well, it's 2:02 here where three.
Oh,
Anyway,
right,
yeah.
right, right.
Anyways, thanks everybody for joining us today. It's a big topic, and I
Absolutely.
think, I think, I don't know. We'll see what happens in the future, but I got a feeling we'll probably revisit this again, and maybe
We'll
maybe
redo it.
maybe
Yes.
take one segment and kind of because there's a lot in here. There's a
There's a
lot.
lot in
Yeah.
here. So I'm actually doing my group coaching tomorrow.
Oh, cool.
I think it's at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
And it is about effective communication. But I realized as I was writing down the agenda, it may have to be a two-step, you
Sure.
know,
Yeah. Just take it in
process
small
because
bites. Yeah.
yeah, there's so much to talk about in terms of this. But really, the first like key fundamentals are the ones that we just summarized. Like that's a starting point. You
Yeah.
start there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about all the rest of it, like auditory, visual, none of that. You don't need to worry about any of that
No.
to
No. You,
start.
you
Yeah.
don't. You don't know. No. I was just gonna. I'll just put this up. I do like this site. Um, I have an account with them, so I kind of. I'll just put that there.
Personality profile. Yeah,
Yes.
16 personalities. That's what I
Yeah.
use with my clients too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good
Yeah.
one, and then they got they go into a lot of details. There's lots of other information there. If you the different kinds of tests too, everything. Again, it's just it doesn't mean right or wrong. There's a better personality there. or whatever. It's your personality.
It's just, yeah, it's
That's all
just
it
what
is.
works for you. You
Yeah.
should share your workshop too.
Yes.
Is it
Yes.
running it?
Not right at the moment. I'm sure. I got a feeling the fall is going to be pretty busy, and there'll probably be an offer in the fall. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. It's well worth it.
Brilliant. Well worth it. Well worth it coming from just getting into the world of this guy here.
Yeah, the
He
world of
knows
this
so
guy.
much. This
Yeah,
guy right
this guy.
here,
This
Rick.
guy.
This guy, my friend.
Yes. Thank you, Fatih.
Hi, thank you, Rick,
All
and thank
right.
you everyone for showing up. Follow, like, keep coming, keep
Share it.
asking questions, share it, let us
Yeah.
know, give
Email
us
us.
feedback.
And yeah,
Yeah,
if you've got a personal communication issue, like if you just can't seem to connect with somebody, a quick conversation with either one of us,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, we'll get
Can
you
really shift things. Yeah, yeah,
focused. Yeah. All right, I'm going to hit the
absolutely.
button now, and then
All
there'll be
right.
this awkward moment where we're waiting. It's like, I want to make sure I don't have my
Or that
mute.
you cut me off like last week. You totally cut me off.
Okay.
See, I did that. You totally cut me off.
And how
You
do
know,
you feel
Rick,
about that?
when you press the button, then my mouth is open. I feel like I got cut off.
All right. Okay, I'm going to give you fair warning. I'm hitting the button
Okay.
now.
Bye.